we are super excited to be here chatting about back to basics with September and the start of school. It's always a good time of the year to start to think about, okay, what do we need to do to get out of our summer slump and start refreshing our plans as we go into the last quarter of the year and the end of the year sort of hustle as we head towards holidays, right? So this is just a really good time to start to think about what are some things that we can do to brush up on, especially our leadership skills. So we are super excited to have you here as part of Leadership Delta. I am going to just quickly introduce myself because there are some people on here that I have not had the opportunity to meet yet. But I have been with Leadership Delta for over a year now, which is super fun to say that I hit that milestone last month. But I have been doing leadership coaching and consulting for over 10 years. I have really just found myself in love with this area of growth and development. I consider myself to be a lifelong learner. I am constantly reading, and when I'm not working, you might find me in my garden, although I may need to update this because I have definitely drifted into more of a lazy gardener where I'm planting it and seeing what happens. Whereas I really do think in terms of leadership, we need to be just a little bit more intentional about what we do. I also want to introduce Laura Boyd. Laura is the president, CEO, founder, queen of Leadership Delta. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself here?
I sure can. A queen. Wow. I'll take that title. I'll take it. So my name is Laura Boyd, as Alex mentioned. I founded this organization about 6 years ago, and we have been doing our personal leadership forums for over 4 years of that time. It kind of evolved into, gosh, we really need to build a community of leaders. So that's what this is in reference. Some of this content is from that, and then Alex will talk a little bit more about that. But we're super excited to have you here. If you have any questions, Alex and I love talking leadership, so we could talk all day about leadership. So we're really going to try to keep it to the 12:30 for sure. So I'll turn it back over to Alex, but we're glad you're here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. So here's just a quick agenda of what we're going to do today. We are going to do a check-in. This is one of my favorite parts of all of our programs. We have an opportunity to just see how everyone's doing, make some introductions, and answer a fun question that allows us to learn a little bit more about each other. Then we'll dive into the ABCs and talk more about those and talk about some next steps if you are interested in working with us further. So let's dive into it. Here's my check-in question. We don't have that many people on the call right now. So if you feel comfortable and would love to say it out loud and share with us, that would be amazing. But my question to you is, I'm a reader. What are you reading right now? Or if you're not currently in a book or listening to one, maybe what's the best thing you've read in the last couple months? So we can either drop it in the chat, or if you want to unmute and share, that would be amazing as well. So I will share what I am currently reading. It is called The Death of Mrs. Westaway, I think. Sometimes I start a book and I'm like, I don't remember the title. It's by Ruth Ware. It's kind of like a thriller book, and I can't wait to see what happens. But that is my personal reading. Professionally, I'm just started reading Oprah's new book, What Happened to You? And so I'm listening to that one on Audible because I love Oprah. So Laura says, Dare to Lead, Third Time's a Charm. Oh, it's such a great, great book. I love that so much. If anyone else wants to share, feel free to drop that in the chat or unmute. Like I said, Natalia, are you reading anything currently?
No, and you know what? That's one goal of mine for 2022 is to read more, just in general. I love to, and Alex, your point of thrillers. I'm big on thrillers, and I just follow this girl who reads a lot, and she posted The Power Couple, which is a thriller, and said she couldn't put it down. So I'm gonna try to be better in 2022. Yeah.
Like, oh, I can get that one from the library. Awesome.
There you go.
Thanks, Natalia. Natalie, how about you? Do you want to share?
Sure. for pleasure, I don't get a chance to read a lot, even though I am part of a monthly book club, but you guys can make assumptions there on what we do during those weeknights. But
That's
the
what book
last,
club is for.
the last book I read, I have two, like personally, I loved Michelle Obama's Becoming. It was really motivational, politics aside. It's nothing like that. If you haven't read the book and you want to be inspired, I definitely recommend that. There's another one. It's a personal memoir. I had to look it up, make sure I had the title right. It's called Educated. I don't know if you guys have heard about it. It's from the girl out in Utah. She had a very interesting background. She was homeschooled. And she actually didn't attend school till she was like in 7th grade, and it just opened up this whole new world for her. She actually ended up having a really phenomenal career. She's incredibly intelligent. It's just a very interesting book to read on what that girl has gone through. From a professional standpoint, I have a boring read. I'm going through the PMP right now, so I'm reading the PMP book. So I would not recommend that as a pleasure read unless you really like dense material. So,
oh my gosh, kudos to you. That book is rough. I went to law school, and it took me about 1.5 years after law school to be able to read for fun again, because it was just snooze worthy anytime you picked up something like that. But that is a good reminder for me. I started Educated and I never actually finished it. So I am definitely going to go back and read that one. Thanks, Natalie. Okay, Alicia, is it Alicia?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi.
Hi. I am also not a very good reader / I should probably read more. I have a whole stack of books behind me that I haven't gotten to. But the last book that I read was Do You Want Fries with That? It's all about trying to be more assertive.
Ooh, that sounds good. Both the fries and the book topic.
Right.
I am adding that to my list. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. This is my favorite question to ask, because I just walk away with a list of books to read. So thank you so much, each of you, for sharing. All right, let's do this. Let's dive into it. We're going to talk about the ABCs. So the first one that we are going to talk about is auditing your values. So it is so important as a leader and as a person to really understand what is the meaning that you are getting from life. And a lot of times that comes from our values. And so we spend a lot of time in our programs at Leadership Delta talking about how do we make life meaningful? How do we find our values and understand what is important to us? And how do we let those values sort of not dictate, but drive our life in the direction that we want to go? And so understanding what your values are, both personal and professional, is super important as a leader. And so when we don't live by our values, it's easy to be like, yeah, when we live by our values, we feel great. Like everything is going well. We feel like we have that purpose and that meaning. But what happens when we don't live by our values? So in the chat, go ahead and write down maybe a couple things about what do you feel when you aren't living your values, or maybe when you're in conflict with your values between either another person or maybe your organization, that kind of thing. So what happens when our values aren't being lived by ourselves? Anyone want to drop in the chat a couple of your thoughts? You get mad at yourself? Yes, for sure. That can happen. Anyone else? Give me a second here.
I'm on my work computer and I don't have the chat capability on this one.
No worries. No worries. Alicia says disconnected. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So here are some of the other things that come up when we aren't living our values, right? We get anxious. We have that discontent feeling. We feel stressed and anger. Sometimes we start questioning our decisions because we're making our decisions from a place that doesn't feel good to us, that doesn't align with where we want to go as a person in that growth and development piece of our lives. And so it's really important that when we start to recognize these feelings or I guess they mostly are feelings. I'm at a loss for the next word of what I want to describe these. Most of these feelings is that we need to really understand where is that coming from and how do we start reconnecting to our values. So one of the things I want you to do to think about is how we go through and audit our values is to check in. Oftentimes we think of like, oh, we're going to set goals, we're going to set intentions on January 1st. Well, it does not matter what day of the year it is for us to start figuring out where do we need to make a change. And so I want you to think about where are ways that your personal values are showing up right now. And in what ways are maybe your personal values not showing up? Just do that little audit to say, hey, this is an area of my life is feeling really good right now. Maybe it's, I'm just going to use reading, right? Because we talked about it. Like I love to read. I'm in the middle of a book. So I feel really good about that right now. And a couple of you said, you know, you'd like to read more. So maybe that's a piece where you're like, is that important to me? Or am I feeling like I should read more because other people say it, but maybe it's not a priority in this season of life. So you start to kind of evaluate that piece. Do this for your personal values, but also for your organization's values. It's super important to audit where are things going well. You know, if your company has a value of, I'm trying to think of one that like feels really, like a lot of companies, family, right? We hear a lot of companies that say like family first, or we're a family environment. And you start thinking about, okay, but I need to go pick up my kids and I'm missing a meeting, or I need, you know, time off to go to an appointment and I feel like I'm not necessarily putting that first. Is that something that's maybe disconnected from your values and your organization? So this audit your values is simply checking in and building awareness of where you maybe can make some changes. Maybe things are going really well and you're going to keep that up, but awareness is the key piece here. We want to start figuring out where are things good? Where are things needing some change? Because that awareness helps build changes and helps us become a better leader when we understand, okay, I need to, you know, spend a little time being intentional on how I communicate with my team, or I need to spend a little extra time reading through these reports to make sure they are right before sending them on, or I need to really work at how I public speak. You know, there are different things that you can do that starts with that awareness piece. Okay, B, build better boundaries. Yes.
Alex, can I
Laura.
just interject? Okay.
Yeah.
All of you, and if you know me, you know this is going to be the case, but I say, Alex, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to sit back and listen but
It took 16 minutes. I was watching.
That's good. So one of the things I just want to talk about values really quickly that is really important is as when we get into our Delta Academy, we really dive into the values because that is who we are. So it's important to understand who are we, and that's where the values show up. It's exactly what Alex was talking about, but we do a deeper dive when we get into that Delta Academy. And so I think it's interesting because when you start to live outside of your values, that shame really starts to eke in. And so we want to make sure that we can see them so that when we are living outside of them, we can recognize it and make adjustments. So we will do a deep dive into our values when we get into Delta Academy. So just that's my 16 minutes in of being quiet.
I love it. That is so true. And I think that's the piece too, that when we think of leadership, sometimes we go straight to how do I lead a team or how do I lead other people? We at Leadership Delta believe like the foundation of leadership is understanding yourself and knowing yourself and really understanding what makes you you, what are your strengths, where are you able to lead from a place of authenticity and genuineness. And so knowing your values, and like Laura said, we do a huge deep dive into this, which happens to be, I think, one of my favorite parts about Delta Academy is that deep dive into your personal values. The other thing that great leaders do is they build better boundaries. The leaders that have better control over their time, themselves, the things that are asked, we all know in like the last year and a half, we have been pulled in multiple different directions. And so we have been forced to make some shifts in how we see our boundaries. Now is a great time to check in and say, what's working, what's not, what do we need to maybe make a change on so that we can go into the last 4 months of this year, which sounds a little ridiculous to say, I understand there are only 4 months left in this year, but how do we build better boundaries? And so I want to challenge you to think about boundaries not as a way of just saying no to other people, but to think of them in terms of fences. So we love to use this analogy in how we determine what a boundary is. So when you think about a boundary, it's really set to protect you. You have your personal boundaries that are physical, emotional, and mental fences that protect you and help you determine what's okay for you and what's not okay for you. So the things in your life that you might have different fences for. When you think about fences, right, there's so many different kinds. There's steel fences that you can't break through. There are moats in the water before you can get to a fence. There are invisible fences. There are fences, I call them Swiss cheese fences, right? They have lots of holes in them and so you can get through. And so it's important to determine what boundary do you need and what type of boundary is that. I use an example. I'm a mom. I have 2 young kids. And so it's easy for me to have holes in my boundaries right now because so much of my time and effort is sort of at the whim of what my kids need right now. So I have a very flexible work environment. Thank you, Laura, because I know that if my school calls, I need to go. Whereas my husband has maybe less holes in his fence right now. And so I have to have that give and take. I also know like my reading, I'm going to just keep doing this because reading is so important to me, is more of a steel boundary. I'm going to find 10 minutes every day to read, whether it's in the morning or at night, or, you know, half the time it's me reading with my Kindle and it falling on my face as I fall asleep. But that's a steel fence boundary for me. So I want you to think about what boundaries do you need, but then also what is preventing you from setting a better boundary? So when we think, oops, I forgot I had extra clicks in here. I apologize for that. But when we think about why we don't like to set boundaries, these are some of the 3 main reasons, right? We're worried about disappointing other people or making other people mad. We think it makes us seem selfish or unlikable. Or maybe it's thinking, if I keep saying no, I'm not going to get that promotion. And so really understanding where are some of those blocks coming from and setting the boundaries is going to help you build better ones. Because when you can overcome these blocks to say, it's not about disappointing other people, it's about what I need in this moment. And you start building that boundary for you and taking care of you and understanding this is okay for me and this is not okay for me. The other piece to that then is when we don't set boundaries, just like when we don't live by our values, we end up living a life that is full of resentment. We get angry, we're frustrated, and we start to play that blame game. And so it's really important that we, 1, set our boundaries and build better ones that support ourselves, but also that we communicate them. That's not the C. We're going to go to a different C, but I want you to know that is part of boundaries, is not only setting them, it's communicating them. Because if you go back to our fence analogy and have an invisible fence boundary, that's something only you know, other people don't know that until you tell them. And so it's really important that you communicate that boundary as well, because you're going to get mad and frustrated and resentful when someone walks right into over your invisible fence because they didn't know about it. So absolutely. I'm reading the comments here. But yes, leaders also take the time to understand other people's boundaries. Absolutely. That's such a great point. Awesome. Okay. I realize I like to chat. I'm going to keep chatting, but I want you to think about, here's your action item. How do you set a boundary right now, personal and professional, to help you get through the next 4 months of this year? Where do you need to maybe strengthen that fence? Maybe where do you need to be more flexible? But what boundary can you set for personal and professional right now to help you increase your ability to support yourself and to support your people? I love this quote from Brene Brown. Brene might be queen number 2, Laura Boyd number 1, Brene Brown number 2. But she says, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. And that is just so true. So it takes courage to set these boundaries, but we got to do it. Okay. Before we get to the third one, I want to chat just a second about Delta Academy. So this is our Leadership Forum program. And one of the reasons that we are so passionate about it is because we really, truly believe that leadership is not just a one-time event. It is this ongoing process where you can grow and evolve and really, truly develop yourself as a person. So Laura, do you want to jump in here and share a little bit about sort of that philosophy behind Delta Academy?
See, now she's inviting me in. So if I just keep chatting as much, then she's like, fine. Just
Now I can go
gonna-
read your chats.
So just a quick side note. So really our philosophy on the leadership development side was I just decided I wasn't going to work with clients that only want to do a one-time leadership development session, if you will. It has to be something where they're aware of it, they have the desire to change, and then the commitment is where you're continuously working on yourself and that practice. So the practice is the fourth piece. And the best part about that is I love to fail during practice because that's when I learn the best. And so when we do that with our companies now, they know that they can't work with me unless we have an ongoing program, that it's a continual basis of development, because you can't do leadership in a bottle and you can't do it just in a one-time session. So that's why we have the Delta Academy, and it's a long-term thing, and then it ends up being like an alumni community. So I get totally geeked out about that, and it's fun to talk about. So these are just some of the topics that we go through in Delta Academy. So I'll let Alex talk about those if she wants to.
Yeah, so we actually have our next Delta Academy starting in just a few weeks on September 21st. I know Natalia is going to be a part of it. We are just so pumped. And so like Laura said, we go through 7 different sessions. These are the topics that we go through. This today is giving kind of a sneak peek, really high level of some of the things that we talk about. But it is really about building that foundation for yourself and understanding yourself in a way that you can then be a better leader and be a better person, not only for yourself, but then for your team and for your organization, and giving back to your community in all sorts of ways. We really follow that sort of that servant leadership model, that the more you serve others, the better the world is going to be. So if you have questions, we would love to have you join us. Laura and I are available to chat more. We even will stay on at the end here to talk more specifically about Delta Academy. But I want to make sure we get to our last ABC. It is check your mindset. So not only are you going to audit your values, you're going to build better boundaries, but you need to check your mindset. Mindset is probably the most important thing. I'm going to go out and say it is the most important thing when it comes to being a leader. This is everything. I saw this amazing quote yesterday from Gary Vaynerchuk. I love him. He maybe rubs people the wrong way, but he sort of tells it like it is. And so he had this quote and he said, don't train for skill, train for mindset. He said the skills can change, right? But they set the foundation for it. But if you don't focus on the mindset, you're going to be lost. And so anyone can learn leadership skills, but the leaders that have mastered their mindset, who have conquered their key moments, are the ones that are able to separate themselves from the pack and show that they are actually capable of learning and leading other people's. It's mindset that sets great leaders apart. And so one of the things, this is going to be super high level, I know, but we go into this way in depth during Delta Academy, but this is a response chain. And I wanted to highlight this because this is one of the things that sort of gave me this aha moment when I went through Delta Academy. Our key moments are things that happen to us in our life. They are things that trigger us, that maybe happen, and we start thinking about, how do I see that event? How do I put meaning to it in my life? Sort of the stories that we start telling ourselves. I had this job a long time ago that I was passed up for a promotion, and it really ate at me because the story I told myself was it was because I was too young and because they just didn't see the potential in me. And I told myself that for a very, very long time, and that fed everything I did. I actually ended up quitting the organization because I didn't get this promotion. Now, if I would have known this response chain, I would have been like, oh, that's the meaning you're telling yourself. What really happened was you were passed over for a promotion. End. But I started applying all these feelings and thoughts, and that became my reality, is that I just felt sort of this resentment toward this organization that previously I had actually really enjoyed. And so when I started to think about, like, how could I have switched my mindset, I realized, like, if I would have just said, okay, that was a promotion, I would have realized a whole lot sooner that job was not meant for me. that was a job that was not ever meant for me. It was completely in a different direction from where I am now. And so it was just one of those things where I got so fixated on the point of where my mindset was that I didn't allow myself to really see it for what it truly was. And so what that did is we go into this pathway to survival or pathway to success. And your mindset determines that, how you respond to life versus how you react to it. And so we go through this pathway and that response chain numerous times, because that is the total game changer for leaders, is understanding how do your thoughts affect your feelings and determine your actions and behaviors. Once you master that, once you can conquer your key moments, once you know sort of what your triggers are and how you're going to deal with them in a way that responds instead of reacts, that's where the magic happens in terms of leadership. So when you think about your mindset, I want you to think about currently, where are some of the ways that you are being blocked? Where are you maybe struggling and seeing like, oh, is that a story I'm telling myself? The more you can think about this now, and maybe you don't have the solution to it, but maybe you can start recognizing it as, how do you recognize where are you getting stuck in your mindset? Where do you maybe need to change things up so that you can see it with more clear eyes and you can get yourself more onto this pathway of success instead of the pathway of survival? The other piece, I love, Laura, you keep bringing me back to that, is that yes, once you know this, you're able to identify it in your team as well. You might say, okay, I have this person on my team who constantly is in a pathway to survival. How do I get them to switch that? How do I get to them to see like that is a story that they're telling themselves, and it's affecting how they behave at work and what their what their work product is, what their productivity is, all sorts of things. And so not only do you apply it to yourself, you can easily apply this to your team. And we go through this a lot. So let me see, it's 12:30 on the dot. If you have time in the chat, drop your key moment. Here we are. Key takeaway. What is something that you're taking away with you from this webinar? We talked about auditing your values, really understanding who you are, what's important to you, how do you prioritize them? How do you build better boundaries then once you know those values? How do you make sure that you're protecting them and that you are prioritizing them in your life and communicating, right? But then we also need to check your mindset. When you think about how you're reacting to what life throws at you, what work is throwing at you, all those things, are you responding or are you reacting? And where do you need to maybe make some changes and make a commitment to do it differently and start practicing those boundaries, practicing saying no, practicing what the change is that you want to see. So those are the three sort of takeaways here as we kind of get out of summer, back into normal, quote unquote, normal this year, and finish this year strong. I'm going to leave my info up here. You can connect with either Laura or I. Laura's is just laura@leadershipdelta.com. But yeah, we'll stick around to chat. I know it's now 12:31, which is my sign to stop talking and say thank you so much for joining us. But we will stick around if you want to ask any questions or talk more about these topics with us. So thanks everyone for joining.